Good morning and welcome to everyone that's coming in. We are excited to be here with you today. You are joining the Job Quality and Racial Equity in a Pandemic Economy webinar. We'll wait a few more seconds and let some more folks join in. Great morning, Patrick. As you come in, let us know who you are, your name, and where you're joining from. I see lots of New Orleans family. Glad you're here. Some folks from Texas, our New York Strive family. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Awesome. So we are going to get started with a quick poll. We would love to get a sense of who's joining us today. Let us know what kind of organization you're working in. Let us know where you're located. And let's do a quick temperature check. What's your energy level like today? Are you feeling 1 kind of draggy or 5 super high energy? Let us know. We will reveal the results at the end so we can get a sense of where everybody's coming from, how they're feeling today. So about 30 seconds for the poll. Make sure you complete it. Let us know what organization you're working in, where you're located, and tell us how you're feeling with your energy level today. Uh-oh. Valerie's having trouble submit. All right. So we have, thank you everyone who completed. We have 34% of folks from the workforce development field. We have youth development, education, business, business association or business advising, economic development, philanthropy, and other types of organizations. We have a huge show out of New Orleans folks in the house, other places in the South, Midwest, and Upper Midwest, Southeast, Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast. Welcome everybody who's here. Energy level, we have lots of folks hovering around 3, 4. I feel you, it's only Tuesday. We have a couple more days in the week left, but we're hoping that this session today will inspire you, encourage you to continue to do the great work that you're doing. So welcome again. My name is Claire Minson. I am the Assistant Vice President of Talent Development and Talent Solutions at the New Orleans Business Alliance. And today we're talking about job quality and racial equity in a pandemic economy. Let's go to the next slide. So of course, in the land of COVID, we must give all technical instructions in the beginning. So we're using Zoom. We are expecting a large audience, so everyone is muted. You can access the chat and Q&A functions at the bottom of the Zoom window. Just move your cursor down and these functions will appear. And if you have a technical issue, please share it via the chat function or email eop.program@aspeninstitute.org. Participation, we want this to be a very participatory session. So use the chat, use the Q&A. We will have time at the end for questions. There are folks managing the chat. Let's engage each other in this discussion. Next slide. Today's agenda. So we are going to do a quick welcome and introductions. We're going to talk about why job quality and racial equity and why now. And then we'll have our two main guests really talk about what it looks like in practice. And then we'll open up the floor for Q&A. So as I shared, my name is Claire Minson. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Talent Development at the New Orleans Business Alliance, which is the economic development agency for Orleans Parish. And some people ask, what does talent development have to do with economic development? And as we know, more now than ever, talent is increasingly being recognized as a driver of economic development because of its contribution to business recruiting, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Our goal is to develop a holistic approach that will help us attract highly skilled workers, retain talent across the board, and connect candidates to economic opportunities through powerful partnerships with businesses. Next slide. We are really focusing on developing talent solutions for all and creating talent pipelines for businesses of all sizes. We've developed a suite of talent solutions that meet the needs of leaders, employers, service providers, and job candidates, focusing on 6 core categories: opportunity youth, adults and returning citizens. We focus on career advancement strategies and partnerships with employers. We really support the professional development of our direct service partners and providers. We focus on asset and financial capabilities for all job candidates and workers. And then we really hone in on our employer engagement strategies, looking to really co-create talent strategies that meet not only the needs of workers, but also the needs of businesses. Next slide. Today's speaker. So I have introduced myself already, and I will pivot to the rest of the panelists here with me to just share a little bit about themselves and who they are. So I'll go to Jenny next.
Hi there, Jenny Weisford from the Aspen Institute Economic Opportunities Program.
Hello, I am Zori Stone, the Director of Student Life at Youth Build Philly.
Good morning, I'm Robin Walker. I'm the Director of the Learning Exchange at Youth Build Philly.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here and participating and agreeing to really co-host, co-lead this session today. Why we are here, I think there's the next slide, right? We are here today, So we're here today because we're really in a double pandemic economy, right? We are not only continuing to deal with the impacts of COVID-19 on our economy and our lives personally and those that we are connected to, but we're also dealing with the lingering and very current impacts of racism on communities of color, specifically Black workers. And so our conversation today, as we think about, and many of our regions are reopening and or dialing back the reopening now as COVID cases continue to rise, we really wanted to create a space to have honest, constructive, productive conversation about what job quality means, what it looks like in practices, where their resources are that you can use as you think about supporting workers to re-enter the workplace. Additionally, to talk about racial equity. Racial equity / equity has become a buzzword. It has been for a number of years, but lots of people really struggle with understanding what it means to operationalize it and put it in practice, and what it really means to center workers, and particularly workers of color. And so we thought it would be a great idea to have really our partners at the Aspen Institute Economic Opportunities Program talk about a little bit of job quality and share the resources they have, and then really spend the bulk of this conversation hearing from Robin and Zuri about what it means to operationalize both job quality and racial equity in the work that they're doing in Philly. So without further ado, I will transition now to Jenny to talk more about job quality.
Thank you, Claire. I can't tell you how excited I am to be part of today's conversation, both because it's so timely and important, and because I'm just a huge admirer of the 3 women on this webinar with me. Their work has taught me what it looks like to actually center job quality and racial equity in workforce development. So thanks to all three of you for the opportunity. So I'm going to try to keep my remarks pretty brief because I want to spend the bulk of our time, as Claire said, hearing directly from Robin and Zuri about how they actually do this work at Youth Build Philly. But let me start by telling you a little bit about the Aspen Institute Economic Opportunities Program. We advance strategies, policies, and ideas to help low and moderate income Americans thrive in a changing economy. We focus on expanding individuals' opportunities to connect to quality work, to start businesses, and to build economic stability. We recognize that race and gender and place all dictate who has access to economic opportunity in America. So we're working and learning to address systemic racism as part of our work to advance economic justice. In recent years, our work at the Economic Opportunities Program has increasingly focused on improving job quality, and I want to talk about why that is. Nationally, for the last 25 years, labor productivity has been on the rise, meaning that for every hour of work that workers put in, they're able to produce more goods and services, but they aren't seeing the benefits of that productivity growth. Workers' wages are staying flat. So let's look at how this is playing out in the labor market that most of you are working in New Orleans. This is pre-pandemic data that we're looking at. It's from 2018, and it's BLS data showing the top 20 occupations in Greater New Orleans by employment. And the question is, can the top 20 jobs in New Orleans support a family? And the answer, as you can see, overwhelmingly is no. Over 80% of the workers in these jobs don't earn a living wage that could support a working adult with one child. Nor are these jobs, which are mostly in retail, food service, and other service roles, necessarily the kinds of starter jobs that could easily propel you somewhere else. And as you can see, these jobs represent over a third of the total estimated employment in New Orleans. And it's worth saying that the average income across all occupations in New Orleans is $44,000, which again is less than the living wage. Next slide, Jenny, thanks. So because of structural racism, people of color, and especially Black people, are overrepresented in these low-wage jobs. And that's one reason that median household income is more than 2.5 times higher for white people than Black people in New Orleans, and that's what you're seeing here. You can see that the median household income for Black families is just under half the living wage for a family with one worker and one child. So you can't talk about the erosion of job quality without talking about race and racism. And you can't address job quality without centering racial equity. But of course, all this data that we're looking at here predates the pandemic. We know that since the pandemic, many of the workers in the top 20 New Orleans occupations were the first to lose their jobs, including in hospitality, in retail, and in food service. And we know that many other workers in those top 20 occupations have been deemed essential, like grocery salespeople. We've recognized that our economy and our society can't function without those workers. Unfortunately, in many cases, this also means that they're facing greater risk of illness or even death because of the jobs that they're holding. And many still aren't earning a living wage. So there's a lot of uncertainty about what this data is going to look like next year or the year after that. But what we do know is that what was normal before the pandemic isn't going to work. Normal wasn't working for too many workers in New Orleans. So as we rebuild the economy, we need to focus on strategies that improve the quality of low-wage work and that center racial equity. And that brings us to the approach that we take at the Economic Opportunities Program. I'm part of a team called the Workforce Strategies Initiative, and my colleagues have spent more than 25 years focused on workforce development. For a lot of that time, our team focused on what we call build ladder strategies that use training and career pathways to help improve mobility for workers. But in more recent years, and especially since the 2008 recession, we've had to expand our approach. We know training is really important, but we've also realized that people need basic stability to be able to even think about strategies to upskill and advance. With so much work concentrated in low-wage occupations, we need to focus on what we call raise the floor strategies that create economic stability and allow workers to retain their jobs. So when I talk about job quality today, that's what I mean. I mean raising the floor. And I think it's important to note that we understand job quality to include sufficient wages, but it also includes other things that can help a worker stay and succeed in a job. Things like a stable schedule or a supportive supervisor or a respectful and inclusive culture. And equity and inclusion are embedded across all of these attributes of job quality. So now that I've named the problems we're up against and the framework that we use at EOP to think about job quality, I want to spend a minute on practical solutions. Over the last few years, a growing number of organizations have recognized the importance of prioritizing job quality in their work. And I know that many of you have, as we saw as you registered. And these organizations have asked for practical tools and resources to do job quality focused work. So last month, with support from Prudential Financial, we released a job quality tools library to help respond to this need. We pulled together tools and resources from innovative organizations all around the country who are engaging in practical action to improve jobs in their own organizations or in the businesses that they partner with or across their local labor markets. And we've included tools that are relevant for organizations across fields: workforce development, worker advocacy, policy, investing and lending, and economic development, along with tools for employers themselves. So I really encourage you to visit the library. It's as.pn/jobqualitytools. And the library is organized in 5 main sections. We have resources to help you understand and define what job quality is, assess job quality in an organization, learn to talk with businesses about improving job quality, and resources to help you address specific attributes of a quality job, like wages, benefits, working conditions, and so on. And we also help provide tools to institutionalize job quality practices over time. And then in addition to those 5 main sections, we've created a special page that focuses on resources that respond directly to COVID-19. We do have a dedicated subsection of equity and inclusion tools that you can apply across your policies and practices, like organizational self-assessments. But you'll also find racial equity and inclusion focused tools throughout the whole library, which reflects our belief that you have to center equity in all your efforts to improve job quality. So to introduce you to the library, I'm going to briefly point you to 2 resources that you can put to work immediately to prioritize job quality in your work. I thought it would be helpful to talk through a couple of concrete examples to give you a practical sense of the kinds of tools that we've included and what they can be used for. And I picked tools that are designed to be used by workforce organizations, since I know that's mostly who's in our virtual room, and that can be especially helpful right now during the pandemic. The first comes from our COVID resources section. This resource was developed by our wonderful partners at the National Employment Law Project, or NELP. And like every resource in the library, we list the primary audiences that can use the tool in their work, as you can see. And we give a brief description of how these organizations can use the tool. So when you click the tool in the library, it'll take you to NELP's website to view it. And I'm sharing this particular tool because we've been hearing from a lot of workforce professionals who help people connect to jobs that they're really worried about how to protect workers during this pandemic. This is a toolkit on worker health and safety, and it provides information and resources about how the coronavirus spreads and workplace safety rights and voluntary guidance that employers can use to help protect workers. So you can use this to talk with job seekers and workers about how to protect themselves, to decide which jobs you're comfortable sending workers into, and to talk with businesses about how to keep their workers safe. Right now, keeping frontline workers safe is a key job quality priority and an equity imperative. The second resource I want to quickly share with you comes from the section of the tools library on how to engage businesses in conversations about job quality. It's a question bank for workforce service providers that our team at the Economic Opportunities Program developed. And it's designed for engaging retailers, but you can use it to inform your conversations with employers across any sector. We created the tool because we've had a lot of conversations with workforce professionals about the ways that it can be really challenging to engage employers and especially retailers. So I'm curious if that resonates with all of you. I wish I could see your faces, but feel free to chime in via the chat box about your experiences. And we've also seen workforce professionals really get to know a business and its practices, and they tell us that that makes them better at identifying employment opportunities that are a good fit for their job seekers, providing services to the business, and influencing the business's workforce practices. And I'm sure we have some of you on the line too, so you please share your experiences as well. The question bank includes questions you can ask to help you learn about a business and its workforce, about employee engagement and development advancement opportunities, as you can see here, and about compensation and scheduling practices. And Youth Build Philly, who you'll hear from in just a minute, builds deep relationships with businesses. And my understanding is that part of how they do that is by asking questions and gathering information about workplace practices so that they can make good matches for young people and coach businesses to improve jobs. We released this tool last year, and frankly, if we developed it right now, it would include a lot more questions focused on racial equity inclusion and focused on worker health and safety. So if you've been asking employers you work with questions about those topics, we'd love to hear about what you've been asking. You can email me at the address on this slide, or again, you can put a note in the chat box. And if you haven't been asking questions about equity or safety, when you do look at this tool, hopefully after the session, be sure you jot down questions that you might want to ask about those. And again, please share that feedback with us later so we can update the tool. And of course, we'd also love to hear your feedback about the tools library, what tools you're using in your work and how, what tools aren't in here that you need, and any other input that can help us make the library better and more useful for you in your work. So you can reach us at eop.program@aspeninst.org. Now, as I mentioned, you can find racial equity and inclusion resources focused on job quality throughout the library. One of those is a tool that Claire developed that I found really helpful in my own work, so I just wanted to call it out. It's 10 essential questions to apply a racial equity lens in workforce policy. And another is a profile that we developed on Youth Build Philly's approach to engaging employers on job quality and racial equity. So with that, I want to turn it over to Youth Build Philly. Robin Walker is the director of the Learning Exchange, as she mentioned. Zuri is the director of Student Life. And I can't tell you how much I've learned from watching their job quality and racial equity work. So I'm really excited for all of you to get a chance to hear directly from them about their approach. So Robin and Zuri, we started out this session with a temperature check to see how everyone is doing. And I confess that's a practice that I learned when I interviewed a Gap manager who did this with all of her frontline workers because she'd learned to do it from Youth Build. So I thought I'd start by doing a quick temperature check with both of you to just understand, what are you and your students navigating right now as we face a pandemic and unprecedented unemployment and increased public awareness of systemic racism? What's top of mind?
That's a loaded question. I think that at the top of our mind right now, to be honest, is just student safety, like you said. A lot of this conversation is about students navigating both what's happening kind of in our country, in the world, and also navigating their everyday lives. And that is crucial to kind of how we do this work in general, looking at the whole person, not just as an employee, not just as a student, but as an individual that has to navigate a lot of layers and a lot of things happening at once. And so I think at the top of our mind is helping students to continue to balance all of those factors at the same time.
Yeah, I would second that. I don't know how much folks know about Youth Build Philly, but our population is 18 to 20, and this year, as most years, they're predominantly Black. So Black and brown students are our predominant population. So, we're all feeling what the world hopefully is feeling. So as Zuri mentioned, their safety is our primary concern, and theirs as well. There's a lot of unpacking of that. And to be transparent, as a Black woman in America, that this is not new for me. It's not new for our students, but it's something that has been more accessible for them to talk about and see. So, yeah, those range of emotions go from anger, sadness, hopefulness, everything that you can imagine, and that I'm sure a lot of people are feeling.
Yeah. Well, I'm remembering, the first time I visited Youth Build and just how special it felt walking through the halls, the energy, the way students and staff were actively supporting each other. And I imagine even right now in this difficult time and when students can't meet in person, you're still creating that culture for young people. So I'd like to ask you both to introduce Youth Build Philly, but especially to kind of paint a picture of that culture and talk about how you create it among staff and students.
Yeah, so we, as Robin said, our students are 18 to 21 and at some point disengaged from the traditional school system, oftentimes for reasons very heavily based in kind of that racial equity conversation. What does education look like in the city of Philadelphia? How does it welcome and how does it empower Black students in our city to kind of value education? And the reality is at this point, there's still a lot of things that we're working on as a city. And so that there's an awkward conversation we kind of have as a staff is we wish we didn't exist, right? To have to open a program that helps students reimagine what education can look like to some degree means that they weren't having the best experience in the traditional systems that our community offers. And so what our culture is about is all about student voice. And I think that schools are trying to figure this out. We are a restorative culture. That is a very long explanation if you don't know exactly what that means when I say a restorative culture. But what I will say is we are a community-centered culture, meaning everything that we do in our program starts and ends with student voice. And we've been at this point, I think we're almost at 30 years or so now, just in the city of Philadelphia, over 40 years starting in New York. And at this point, all of the youth build programs across the world start and end with student voice. So if you go to any youth build Philly, if you go to any youth build, that's the energy that you'll find. Specifically for our culture though, city of Philadelphia is a very segregated space, and students experience, like I said, in the education field, most of the time, is not necessarily the most empowering. And so when we welcome them into our community, the first thing that we do with them is talk about what they want school to feel like, what they want their community spaces to feel like. And we build our program every year. There's large aspects of our program that are built based on what each individual class is looking for out of that experience. And that takes a lot of work. So I don't even want to say that like that's easy. I don't want to say that like, oh, all of the programs that do workforce development should just, listen to the people that they work with. It's not easy. It's very intentional work. But if you do it right, you put that energy up front, and the students and your clients and the people that you work with will have a much better experience. And a lot of things that you deal with throughout your program time or throughout your experience with those clients or with the employees that you're trying to place, you avoid some of those pitfalls because you built that community up front and you were able to ground yourselves in a common community and some common community agreements.
Yeah, to piggyback off what Zori's saying, what you're feeling, Jenny, and what most people feel when they come in is community and love. And so we are very intentional about building relationships. Some of that is formal through our formal mentoring program. Every staff member at Youth Build is a mentor. So that does not matter if you're an ED or a teacher or anything in between. We have those formal relationships, and we also have informal ways that we gather together and build those relationships in community. So what you're feeling when you come in is people that have really taken the time and put in some solid work to get to know each other. And as Zori said, that's not easy and it doesn't go well all the time. But our young people know that we are there for them and we have high expectations, but also high support. So on our best day, we are offering lots of love, lots of support, lots of redirection, lots of things to make them the best version of themselves, not to be a different person, but to be the best version of themselves that maybe they didn't see. And so I think that just comes out when people come into the building. You'll find that energy of people who are coming from all across the city, who had experiences that didn't work for them. Maybe it was their fault, but more often than not, it wasn't. We like to say, our executive director likes to say that the least interesting thing about our young people is that they were disconnected from school. And so there's a lot of other pieces to that person. And we like to find out and try to address all of those other pieces. And as Zori mentioned, like this is always a work in progress. It requires a lot of energy, a lot of staff time, a lot of training and development, and a lot of other things that go into it, so that young people can feel supported and can feel that that you are looking out for them, but also trying to find people to connect with in partnerships and the right staffing and stuff. So hopefully what you feel is love and connection and relationship building, because there's a lot of sweat and tears behind that. So we hope that comes across.
That's what it is. And
I'm glad you see it. On our best days, you will see that. And even when we're not having a good day, this is, Zori's work to lead, but most of our young people will say they still felt that their voice was heard in those decisions.
I love that. So on that piece about training and development, the blood, sweat, and tears that's going on the back end, I know you've been really committed and intentional about doing internal work on racial equity. Can you talk for a minute about that process, what you've done and where it is right now?
So let me start by saying that when we think about culture as an organization, we think about it in what we like to say kind of like 5 layers. The first layer being staff with staff culture. So how do we engage with each other? And to be honest with you, racial equity is an important piece of that conversation, because what we respect and understand as an organization is that we do have a lot of our facilitating staff are white staff, right? So if we have all Black students or 90-something% Black students on any given year and all white staff, mostly in the facilitating role, what does that mean for our student experience? And that conversation starts with staff with staff. That conversation does not start with students. And if we're only starting conversations about kind of the racial experience, when we start talking about our students, our clients, our employees, or the people that we're trying to place, then we're too late in the conversation, because there's an experience that we have every day, and there's a learning opportunity that we have every day with each other as a diverse staff that helps us get more and more comfortable with that conversation to be able to have it with all of the other layers of culture, right? In the next couple layers of culture, you will have staff with students, meaning what is the energy that we bring to them? What do they feel from us as a staff? And how do we make sure that the experience that they're having from us is understood? Do we survey how they feel about working with us? Do we survey how they feel about different facilitators, different employees of our organization and their experience that they're having with us? And then what is it that we feel from them? So how do they reciprocate that energy? It's a really important thing to think about what you're seeing from, what we're seeing from our students. And how is it that they're translating? I know for us on an amazing day, because of the amount of love and the relationship building that we give with our students, if I walk in and my energy's off, there's gonna be a bunch of students that check on me before I even have an opportunity to say what's going on. Because we have connected to the point where they know what my affect generally looks like. And they feel comfortable, and they know that we have a free-flowing space where they can say, hey, Ms. Zori, I feel like your energy's off today. I like to, how you feel? Are you good? You need something? And that just makes the whole experience. It's not me doing something to them. It's not me, being this pillar of community and always being the answer to the problem. It's a community space, and they're going to know when I'm off, just like I'm going to know when they're off. And then student with student, how do they get along with each other? What do they do when we're not around, right? What is the energy in the community that they keep with each other? And how do we see the culture that we're trying to promote kind of manifest in spaces when there's not a staff there to say, this is what you're supposed to be doing? Are they internalizing it? Is it actually influencing them to say, we want our space to feel like this and look like this, so much so that we're going to represent that even when someone else isn't here to make us do that, or to try to hold that for us. And then what's really important about this conversation is internal to external, right? What is the vibe that we give off to other people? It's really important to us that when you came there, you felt that love and that energy. And that that then that's the expectation, that you reciprocate that energy, that you can't come into our space and not feel that so heavily, that you now know it's okay for you to be comfortable here. It's okay for you to join into that space, but also that as the students would say, this is positive vibes only. That's what we're trying to do here. And when you come here, you should feel that, and you should know that. And like I said, when we're talking about racial equity, culture is a crucial piece to racial equity. What pieces of culture become the rules and the expectations of a space should be determined by the people that will be existing in that space, and not some outside force that's telling that community how they should exist. Now, clearly there's going to be standards, like Robin said. We're going to have a lot of love and a lot of structure at the same time. You can have both of those things at the same time, but we build structure based on the collective community influence. What do we want this to look like and feel like?
Yeah, and when I think about, a little echo there. When I think about the internal work that we have done over time, it's probably some of the hardest work that we've done. When you talk about, you know, everybody believes that people come to work at a place for the right reasons. But when you have to start dissecting all the different layers of young people and their experiences in the environment, then you find out that it's a lot deeper than that. And so we created a social identities committee to talk about all of the different identities that our students, our young people, you know, have and experience, and as well as our staff. And as Zori said, initially the group had a lot of ideas and it was like, let's talk about how these things affect students. But we realized, like, let's talk about how it affects each other. And we need to spend a lot more time on that. And then the next layer of that is like, we can talk about all of the differences and all the identities, but if we don't talk about race and the fact that 99% of our students are Black, when you add that layer, it just compounds whatever experience that they're having, positive or negative. And so we need to address that. We need to spend our time focusing on that. And that was really hard for a lot of people. That conversation that people need to have an experience with themselves and with their coworkers was really, really challenging. And we're finally getting to a place, you know, the world around us, it's unavoidable. We have to have these conversations. And so we've been doing that in formal professional development spaces. We work with a group out of UPenn called the Lion Story to help facilitate some of that work. We have an amazing team on the committee that is trying to push us to continue to go farther when people are uncomfortable. Because race is not a conversation that you ever finish. There's always going to be a level of uncomfortability. And so we have to keep pushing that. And to be transparent, there's been some, you know, in our space, there's a lot of options. So how do we go from doing opt-in spaces where people are reading articles to mandatory spaces? And, you know, still making that feel safe. So things like Zuri implemented, like Fear in a Hat. So if you can share your experiences or share your thoughts anonymously, and then we can read them out and discuss them together. Or journaling, or doing some things that don't require you to publicly speak, although we are trying to move that there. But still engaging in the conversation, because our young people did not have the opportunity to opt out. And so making sure that that's at the center. And although we don't necessarily talk about students every single time we're talking about ourselves and our own experiences, we know at the core of our work, our young people and their experiences should be there front and center. And so I think the social identities work is the best example for me of how we've been addressing that internally, because in my 5 years, it's changed so dramatically. And then that ultimately led us to conversations about the employees and the people that we bring into the building. And so as Zuri said, like, we are showing you who we are, and then you have to decide if you're going to keep that same energy, as our students say, or if you're going to be somewhere else. Because if we're talking about this, and quite frankly, one of the things that we seem to forget a lot is we are also an employer. And so if we are an employer and we know some of the challenges that we face internally, and we're becoming more and more comfortable talking about them, we're expecting that people who come into our space and want to partner with us on any level, whether it's a community service partner, a volunteer for, you know, after school, or an employment partner, that they're going to be having these conversations too. So we try to be transparent about our journey in that, and that we are still on it. We will be on it for a while, but as Zuri said in the beginning, that staff to staff is level one where we need to start. And it's probably the most, for some people, I would say the most uncomfortable. There's obviously some uncomfortability when you are a staff member talking to a student about some of these things and the level of vulnerability that you need to have. But staff to staff was crucial for us.
And if I can just add, I think the important piece of that is respecting the inherent power dynamics that happen in these spaces. And if you, as someone that is taking a position that inherently has power, is not respecting what your race in that position means to the people that you supervise or that you facilitate with, then you're going to miss a great opportunity to connect with them on a deeper level and to have realer conversations. And if we say that we want to prepare, we want to prepare our students for the real world, don't we all wish that someone would have prepared us to have this conversation a lot sooner? Right? So I have to then try to make sure that I go bravely into that space so that the students feel comfortable. When we started having these conversations, it was very difficult for some students to talk about race in front of their white staff, because they're like, I've never had this conversation in a diverse room, right? So Black students might talk about it with other Black students, but I've never been able to talk about this in front of someone that has the power to grade me, right? I don't want to say the wrong thing because I don't want to end up with a bad relationship with someone that has some sense of power in what happens to me in this space and this experience. And how fair is that to allow that anxiety to hang over students' heads and then say, oh, go off into the world and try to have that conversation with the person that controls your paycheck, right? Or try to go have that conversation with a banker who's determining whether you get this loan. Or, you know, try to point out these you know, inequities that you're seeing as you're existing if you've never been given the language to have that conversation. And I also can't expect a staff member to have that conversation effectively with a student if we haven't come to some common understanding about what this means for us as a staff. So we've got to be on the same page. And we're not there yet. Like Robin said, this is all work in process. I don't know if we'll ever be there, right? Like if it's a destination, but the conversation is happening. And this is an opportune time where the conversation is happening everywhere for you to kind of speed the process up and try to, let's get as deep as we can, as quickly as we can while the door is open. Because, you know, we all know that about a month ago, we were all still treading very lightly on some of these conversations. And some of us even, including those of you in the webinar, you know, this conversation got a little bit easier a couple weeks ago, and you got a little bit bolder in your heart to say what you really needed to say, or to ask the question that you needed to ask, right? We had some of our white colleagues that were like, all right, I'm just gonna ask it now, right? I'm just gonna say what I need to say because I would like to use this moment to get as much understanding as I possibly can. And I think we have an opportunity to do that in this moment with the pandemic. It's a lot more time for reading and research, right? It's a lot more time at home to kind of to add it to your practice if you weren't already doing it. But for the sake of the people that we work with, we have to do this. We should have already done it. And if it wasn't already done, if you haven't already been moving that needle, what's your excuse now?
So I want to talk about how this relates to job quality and sort of how you practically prioritize job quality in your work. You know, what does a quality job look like for a young person, and how do you influence employers to provide quality jobs, recognizing that equity is a core part of what that quality job means?
Yeah, so I think what a quality job looks like varies based on the young person. So as you said in the beginning, Jenny, obviously compensation is important, but for some young people, it might be the proximity to transportation is going to take priority over that. It could be healthcare. It could be consistent hours. If I know that I can have the same schedule every day that allows me to then be a caregiver at home or allows me to pick my child up from daycare, that may be more important than an extra $1 or $2 an hour. So I think that varies for young people. And I think for us, it's important that we know that and understand that. And so how we prioritize that in our work is not making assumptions about what a quality job looks like for someone, but having, going back to the relationships, understanding that the young people that we work with are all different. And like most people, they all have different needs. And so how are we, I guess, customizing that conversation to each individual so that we can provide quality advice, quality suggestions to them based on their current circumstances, based on where we know they want to go in the long term, and really making sure that they're partners in that conversation. And so that we're not just saying, you know, here's the catalog of jobs that we have, pick one, or, you know, recommending to people to do things that they may not be a good fit for, not because of ability, but because they don't have transportation, or because they have childcare, or because they have something else. So really understanding our young people helps us to really understand what a quality job looks like for them. And it's become, you know, more and more of a factor over the years that I know that I've been there, that we really need to include their voice in that conversation and not make decisions for them, not make assumptions, and not, put our own opinions on that. So previous years, there were a lot of, well, this is just a quality job because this organization is hard to get into, or, they don't take a lot of young people, or they don't do this or whatever. But it wasn't a fit for the young person. So not making assumptions about where we see our young people and more prioritizing their needs long and short term. And then I think Zuri can speak to some of how we translate that to the trainings that we do. But when we talk to employers, we are more clear about, you may be one of the largest in the community as an employer. You may do a lot of great things. You may be a great employer, but that doesn't mean you're going to be a fit for everybody. So we may only recommend 2 people. And how we have those conversations that are more transparent. And so quality is defined by the individual, I guess. With some basic, we're not sending anybody to anything that just would be a horrible thing, but we're more transparent about, this decision is yours to make and we're going to support that.
Yeah, and I think the staff conversation is super important because, the people that are in the positions to do the connecting with jobs, what are their value systems and what are their understandings of what success looks like, right? Because a lot of this can often be built, your value system may be built on some inherent bias yourself. Your expectations of where this particular person could and should work could be determining who you are reaching out to build partnerships. And if you're not having that conversation as an organization, as a company, to kind of ground everyone's value system in the same way, you could then have employers that in the scheme of things are not necessarily, clearly they're not doing anything intentionally dangerous or disrespectful, but they may be looking through a lens that is skewing the opportunities that are being provided for the people that you're working with. For us, our students, like Robin said, you have to ask them exactly what they want to do. You also can't say, oh, well, maybe this person doesn't feel like a good fit for me, so I'm going to just take that conversation off of the table for a young person. And it's also not our right to say, oh, because I feel like this person or this organization is discriminatory in a certain way that I'm gonna write them off to a certain degree either, right? It's a community conversation. What do we feel? What does a student feel like about this particular employer? And giving them the honest conversation. Now, if there are things that are clearly dangerous and toxic that you need to make sure get addressed, then you address that. But for instance, we may send students from the inner city to suburban spaces. And it's not for anyone to tell a student that they wouldn't fit there or that they wouldn't like it there. That is for a student to determine where they want to feel comfortable and where they want to work. So you may inherently be like, oh, no, let me not engage in that with that employer because our students aren't from that space. But that's not your decision. That's not your choice. So you also just continuously having that conversation with each other helps you kind of check yourself, check in, see what decisions you've made over time. And when we have worked with employers, and we try to have the conversation as soon as we meet with people. This is who our students are. They are, every year there's 200 plus different people. So I can't paint a wide picture of what you're going to experience. The question is, are you willing to meet them? Are you willing to get to know them individually to understand who they are? And then you guys can work together. We can talk about how you open up your practices to be more inclusive of community conversation, how you build the kind of rules and regulations of your workplace to come closer to what we call community agreements, right? So this isn't about people walking into rules and regulations and you telling them what things should feel like and look like. Sometimes we should allow the people that are working in different spaces to give opinion and impact what the agreements of that space are going to look like. So we've done anything from empathy training to say, listen, these are young people. And sometimes people try to ostracize our students and say, oh, well, they disengaged from school, so they must have these particular traits. That's not true. I think any young person, people no call, no show at the age of 19 every day, right? Doesn't depend on what type of school you went to. Some of these same trainings that we're doing are not just for youth build students or a certain type of student. Stop looking at them and trying to place them and make them different than the other people they're going to work with. Let's just talk about what it actually means to be a good supervisor, right? How do you identify the traits of an employee and coach them up, and not just having shift managers that are there to penalize people for not fitting the culture that you're building if your culture isn't inclusive.
And one thing I would add that Zori brings to mind is how do we influence employers to, to be a quality job replacement? We do that by, one, we have 200 plus young people every year. So we have a wide variety of young people for you to work with. We also have had employers who told us that because of the qualities and the values that we have at Youth Build that we try to translate to employers and say that you should adopt these as good business practices, not just youth development practices, that Youth Build students stay there longer. So it helps them with, I mean, at the end of the day, employers are looking at profit and loss. They're looking at, what are their social impact goals, and we can help them meet a lot of those things. And we're not naive to say that it's not a business. Of course it is. And so having the ability to say our young people are staying at jobs longer because Youth Build taught them how to accept feedback at 18 that is not necessarily given in other spaces, or Youth Build taught them to do these things, or Youth Build offers a mentor that they can go follow up with, or someone, if you call them and say, this person, no call, no show, which is a typical thing, they have a mentor that says, what happened? That's crazy. You can't do that. Or you should explain that you had transportation issues and can walk them through those challenges. So I think that those are a lot of things that we can help and influence employers and partners when they work with us, and showing that there are a lot of benefits to that.
I see we have a lot of questions coming in, so I want to make sure we have time for that. Claire, do you want to help facilitate that piece of the conversation?
Yes, and so we're probably going to have time for one question, but I just want to really quickly reiterate what I heard and really contextualize that as we talk about racial equity and what it means to actually operationalize that, right? What I heard from Zuri and Robin was that they're honoring and valuing the shared humanity of the individuals that they're working with, right? And they're seeing them as whole people and engaging with them as such. What I hear is that not only as they practice inclusion, and meaning having the young people sit at the table, but inclusion is really about sharing power. And they're sharing decision-making power with the young people that they're working with, not just making decisions on their behalf, but really engaging them and co-creating with them. What I hear is a sense of shared accountability, right? They're holding each other accountable. They're holding the young people accountable. They're also creating space for the young people to hold them accountable as well. They're really being clear about whose culture they're centering, right? Is it the culture of the young people that they're working with, or is the culture of this society in which we live in, which really prioritizes and centers whiteness? I hear that it's a journey. Racial equity and job quality is a journey and not a destination. That it's critical to pay attention to the power dynamics, right? Not only within the nonprofit organization and between the facilitators and the job coaches, but also with the employers. And how are we equipping young people to go in and really engage with employers, but also recognizing the power dynamics that exist not only between an employer and employee, but between a white boss and a Black employee, right? And so I just want to contextualize and say all of those are components of actually operationalizing racial equity and job quality in the work. Sometimes we don't name it as that, but it's really important to get clear on that. And so we've gotten a ton of questions. I'm going to just ask one of them, but if it's okay with Robin and Zuri, if we can have folks really, if they have additional conversations, share your contact information so that they can follow up and hear how you're actually operationalizing your practices. And so one question came from a panel, a guest today. As a Black woman, how do I initiate conversation with company leaders about job quality and or racial equity and equality?
Well, you just jumped right on in there, didn't you, Claire?
Yeah.
Z, you want to go first? Or?
Sure. I think that one of the first things that I did personally was try to assess what I was experiencing myself, and what I was seeing myself, and starting to figure out the best way to kind of understand it, and really centering that this is not about me or one individual person, but this is about a bigger systematic conversation that is impacting people every day, impacting myself every day. And so I think, especially at this time, now that we have the larger context, there's a little less to explain. I think some people are picking up on it a little bit quicker now, or people are seeing the thing that they needed to see to finally make it real for them. And so I would say, as a Black woman, start to use the spaces that you know exist for some level of comfortable conversation to ease it in there. It's going to be uncomfortable regardless. So there's no easy way to do it, but you got to start to assess, what am I experiencing, and where are the places where I know my voice can start to be my voice can start to be heard, but I have to speak up somewhere, and I have to start this conversation somewhere. And you'd also be surprised how many other people might be ready to have that conversation too. They're just waiting on someone to spark it.
Yeah, I would say, and I apologize, we're not able to be contained to 20 minutes, so we're happy to respond to anyone at any time with any extra questions. But for me, I can vividly remember an experience with an employer that was not going well. And it was taking an emotional toll on me, because as a Black woman, I knew what microaggressions were, and I knew what I was experiencing. But as a Black woman in a space with white directors and supervisors and things like that, there was this internal conflict, and finally got to a point like, this is unacceptable. And then finding out that young people were having that same experience made me pivot from then on to, I need to be responsible for the young people that are coming behind me. And it's not easy. It took me way longer than I admit now than I should have to speak up and to say something and to end with that relationship. But knowing that the young people behind me were watching to see how they should be treated and what their expectations are, and that microaggressions were just part of the norm and things like that, made me realize that it's always going to be difficult. It's always going to be challenging. But I have a role and a responsibility in that. And sometimes that's shaking the table and ending the partnership, and sometimes it's making smaller incremental changes, and sometimes it's, if this partnership is good for the organization but not good for me personally, like, how do we figure that out? So there's a lot of different ways that can happen. But for me, it was an experience where this is impacting young people, and I have a responsibility for myself and for them. And so that helped me transfer, the way I work with people now, and speak up and speak out. No.
If I could add one tangible thing, something that you'll see in restorative practices and just good community kind of conversation, is ask questions. So ask about perspective. Hey, this just happened. How did you feel about it? What is your perspective on it? Do you mind if I share my perspective on it? And doing that kind of opens the door for that conversation, because sometimes just revealing, allowing someone to process what they feel like happened, and then giving your perspective helps bridge that gap of understanding.
And the last thing I add is, it goes along with the questions, but assumptions. I assumed that my supervisor and director would be upset that we would lose a partnership, instead of feeling that they would support and protect me because they trust me as an employee. And so that was a lot of assumptions happening. And when the situation was revealed and came out, the conversation was like, well, of course we trust you and your instincts. Like, we wish you would have shared that sooner. So I guess making assumptions or not making assumptions is advice that I would give. Just asking the question, having the conversation.
Yeah, so we are at time, but I want to say, sorry, the screen changed. I was like, is it ending? It's really important, like, asking questions around just the culture. What is the organizational culture, right? How do you actually create an equitable space? And as both Dury and Robin have shared, we are in a context right now where the questions are acceptable. And actually, if you're not asking these questions, you are being irresponsible. And so thinking about how do you ask employers about their organizational culture and how they create space for inclusivity inclusivity and equitable practices, I think is a really good step. There are lots of great tools that we talked about here. I'm so excited that so many of you joined today. Please reach out for the questions that didn't get answered to Zui, Robin, or myself and Jenny. And we look forward to hopefully to be able to share the recording so that many more people can hear the great tips, tools, and strategies on how we can really shift the power dynamics, transform the field of workforce development, and center workers. Thank you.
Thank you.